Now, we often get asked by clients where we think the share market might be in 1 year or 3 years or 5 years from now. So in this video, because Stockspot's actually been around for 10 years, I wanted to share the returns of each of the 5 key ETFs in our portfolios and talk about what their returns have been over the last 10 years and what you would have if you'd invested $100,000 into each of them 10 years ago. Now, obviously, this isn't a perfect indicator of the future, and it may be different ETFs that do better or worse in the future, but it gives you a pretty good idea of what those averages have been, at least over the last 10 years. And the last 10 years, I'd say, weren't an exceptional 10 years by any standard. In fact, the Australian share market had a lower return over the last 10 years than its average over the last 100 years, but therefore it's a pretty good basis to expect not too different returns over the very, very long run. And so let me start with the first ETF, which is the Australian Shares ETF, the Vanguard Australian Shares ETF. Now, its return over the last 10 years has been, after fees, 7.93% per annum. What does it mean? Well, if you put $100,000 in that ETF 10 years ago, you would have $214,000 today. So you would have just over doubled your money. Pretty good return over 10 years. The next ETF is the Gold ETF. Now, this is an ETF that if you'd invested $100,000 in over 10 years ago, you would have earned 10.21% per annum. So it actually did, interestingly, better than Australian shares over the last 10 years, and $100,000 would have turned into $264,000 10 years on. So you would have 2.5 times your money if you put your money into the very boring, stable investment of gold 10 years ago. The third ETF we recommend is the Government Bonds ETF, IAF. This is the worst performer of the 5 in our portfolios over the last 10 years, although it's been a great stabilizer when there's been market falls and market volatility. So its average returns has only been 2.17% per annum. So $100,000 in that ETF would have turned into $124,000. But really, you've got to think of bonds not just as a way of earning returns, but actually smoothing your returns of your portfolio. So although that doesn't sound like a great result, it still has added a lot of benefit to the portfolios. The fourth ETF is the Global 100 ETF. Now, this has been our best performer in our core portfolios by a long shot over the last 10 years, really because US technology shares have been driving global growth and driving global share markets, and this ETF has a huge exposure to US technology companies. That's why it's done really well. It's returned 15.88% per annum over 10 years. And you can imagine that compounds a long way. And in fact, $100,000 invested 10 years ago into that ETF would have driven to $436,000 today. So you would have more than 4 times your money in that ETF. And the final ETF in our portfolios is the Emerging Markets ETF. Now, it's returned 4.9% per annum over the last 10 years. So $100,000 turned into $162,000. Now, keep in mind, all of those growth figures are after ETF fees, but not including the Stockspot fees. So if you aggregate them all together in a portfolio, and I want to use in this example the Topaz portfolio because it's the most popular with our clients, it's our high growth or aggressive growth option. The Topaz portfolio, which has a blend of all of these ETFs, if you put $100,000 into it 10 years ago, around when we started the business, it would be worth about $220,000 today. So you get a blended average of all of these ETFs, and you would have about 2.2 times your money, and that's after all costs. That's after ETF fees, Stockspots fees, and all other costs. So that gives you a bit of a flavor of how the different ETFs in our portfolios have returned over the last 10 years. What do we expect from the next 10 years? Well, I think it will probably be a different ETF that has the best performance. That's perfectly normal, and you expect different leadership over different decades. But again, we expect the different ETFs to work well together to help to create a great portfolio that's diversified and that actually helps to withstand ups and downs, and ideally give a good return that beats inflation for our clients over the next 10 years.